So, what on earth has philosophy got to do with business? Why should executives pay attention to philosophical theories? Well, one reason is that as human beings, we are fallible creatures. Many of the beliefs we take for granted are in fact flawed or even false. And philosophy reminds us to check on our belief system. In a sense, to assume, take for granted that many of the assumptions that underpin our decisions are false. Now, of course, business is the theatre of decision making. You know, profit, success in business, achievement, meeting customer needs is a return in some sense on the truth. If the assumptions that underpin our decisions are more true or less false than those of our competitors, it's more likely that the marketplace will reward us for this truth. And therefore, in some sense, the art of business is to learn as fast as possible. The bottom line in business perhaps be the pace of our learning. And of course, learning, because it comes from trial and error, means that we have to be prepared to make mistakes, lots of mistakes, in the pursuit of the truth. And I think this is what philosophy best has to teach business. So the next question perhaps is, what has philosophy got to do with management? Now, to answer that question, I think we need to divide management or managerialism into two quite different areas. One is hierarchy, the belief that command and control, structured organizations is important for success. And the other is bureaucracy, the belief that there is a right way to do things. Now let's take hierarchy first. What's wrong with hierarchy from a purely philosophical perspective? Well, where hierarchy can go wrong is that some people are treated as means rather than ends. In other words, they're treated as human resources rather than resourceful humans. Economists often treat human talent as a factor of production, rather like materials, plant and equipment. But of course, people are far more than factors of production. And unless we treat people as ends in their own right, and perhaps weaken the command and control system to become a more open society of dialogue and shared creativity, unless we do that, hierarchy can create what we might call a feudal society with a huge inequality of power between those who are leading and others who perhaps are following. Now, bureaucracy's flaw, I think, is that it believes that there is a right way of doing business, a right way of organizing. In business, we often call this best practice. And this, I think, from a philosophical point of view, is a category error. It was Gilbert Ryle at Oxford almost 100 years ago that talked about a category error. A category error is when we miscategorize a phenomenon. The example he gave was someone walking through Oxford and noticing all the buildings, all the colleges, and at the end of the walk asking one of the professors, so where is the university? Of course, this is a category error. The University of Oxford is not a collection of buildings, it's an institution. Now in business, the category error, I think, arises because we think of business as, if you like, cooking, cuisine, where there's a good recipe. And if we just follow the recipe, we'll probably get to quite a good result. Whereas actually business is a game. It's much more like chess than it's like cuisine. And there is no formula, no algorithm for winning at chess. It requires, in some sense, first-hand thinking, unique practices rather than best practices. There are no algorithms. And I think this is the message that philosophy has to business people who are relying perhaps slightly too much on hierarchy and bureaucracy. So third question, what about rationality? What does philosophy have to say about a rational activity? And is business a rational activity? Well, first, let's try and define rationality. I think there are three ways of of thinking about rationality. The first way is that rationality is whatever we do to achieve a set of goals. And of course, this is very close to the business notion of rationality, the effective pursuit of an objective. But another definition of rationality might be applying what we know, applying good theory. I think this is, if you like, the engineering concept of rationality. You know, building a bridge, we need to do it in the light of, you know, the theory of physics, the theory of mechanics. And that's about the application of good theory, in a sense, doing the right thing. The third way of defining rationality is perhaps in the scientific manner. Scientists think of rational behavior as asking good questions first and foremost, and then finding, perhaps through experimentation, good ways of finding answers to those questions. But first of all, it depends upon the asking of a good question. Now, this, I think, is essential in business. Too often we jump to the pursuit of goals as being, if you like, the core mental construct, whereas I think that problem solving, question asking and answering is much closer to the kind of behavior that will produce much better results. What is the question that we're trying to answer? What is the problem to which we're looking for good solutions? That orientation towards rationality is a very powerful one, and it belongs very much to the philosophy of science. So, fourth and final question. What about planning? What does philosophy have to say about strategic planning? Well, I think many philosophers, particularly of the pragmatic variety, would say that planning is a bit like rain dancing. If you remember, the whole point of rain dancing is to dance in order to bring about the rain. And of course, when the rains eventually come, we say to ourselves, thank God we danced, because it was the dancing that brought the rain. And I think it's the same with planning in business. We put a lot of effort into imagining a possible future. That future may arise or it may not arise, but when we get a result, we think that it was somehow due to the effort we put into planning. I think pragmatic philosophy would say, let's act more on the world rather than do all of this thinking. And in response to how the world reacts to our actions, we form our ideas. Sometimes it's the action that brings about the thought, rather than necessarily believing that more thinking will bring about the appropriate action. So in some sense, philosophy urges us to experiment more, to get to the truth through trial and error. In Darwinian evolutionary terms, it's through variation and selection. Try lots of ideas, not all of them will work, but use the test to sift out the error from the truths. And I think that's what philosophy has to contribute to business.